Hello, and welcome to Anonna's creation. Today, we begin a journey into one of the most profound and troubling stories ever told. It's a story about ambition, intelligence, and a fate so cruel it has echoed through millennia. This is the myth of Sisyphus, the man doomed to push a boulder for eternity. But to understand his punishment, you must first understand the man. When you think of a man punished by the gods, you probably picture a brute, a tyrant, or a monster. Sisyphus was none of those. He was, quite possibly, the most intelligent, cunning, and resourceful man who ever lived. He wasn't a king who ruled by strength. He was a founder, an innovator, a CEO. His great city, Corinth, wasn't just a place on a map. It was the center of the world. Imagine the hustle of Wall Street, the commerce of Silicon Valley, and the strategic importance of Washington, D.C., all rolled into one ancient metropolis. Sisyphus built this. He built it through trade, diplomacy, and an uncanny ability to know what people wanted before they knew it themselves. He was the man who could sell sand in the desert and ice in the Arctic. He was a master of information. Sisyphus didn't just respect the gods, he saw them as competitors. From his towering office in the Acrocorinth, the highest point in the city, he looked down on the world. He felt he was an equal to the powerful beings who resided on Mount Olympus. He saw them not as divine entities, but as rivals on a higher floor of the same corporate building. And the CEO of that higher floor, Zeus, was a figure Sisyphus both envied and secretly despised. He saw Zeus's power, but also his carelessness, his vanity, and his volatility. Sisyphus believed he was smarter. And that, right there, was his first and greatest mistake. The machine of his downfall began to turn on a day that seemed like any other. Sisyphus was surveying his domain, watching the ships file into his ports, when he saw something unusual. It was a disturbance in the sky. He watched as a massive eagle, larger than any natural bird, descended from the clouds. This was no ordinary eagle. Sisyphus knew this was Zeus's personal emblem, his mode of transport when he didn't want to be seen. The eagle snatched something, or rather, someone, from a nearby riverbank and soared away toward a secluded island. Sisyphus squinted. He recognized the figure. It was a young woman named Aegina. Sisyphus didn't just know of her, he knew who she was. She was the daughter of a powerful local figure, a man named Sisyphus. Mr. Asper, as we might call him, was the spirit and guardian of the main river that fed the region, but critically, it did not feed Corinth. Sisyphus smiled. This was not a tragedy, this was leverage. A few days later, Mr. Asper arrived in Corinth, frantic. He was a broken man, his power diminished by grief. He went from city to city, asking everyone, "Have you seen my daughter? Have you seen Aegina?" He finally came before Sisyphus. "King Sisyphus," he pleaded, his voice cracking, "you see everything from your high tower. You know all the gossip, all the secrets that move through these streets. Please tell me, who took my daughter?" Sisyphus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at the desperate father. "Information is a valuable commodity, Mr. Asper," Sisyphus said, his voice smooth as silk. "I do, in fact, know what happened to your daughter. And I know who took her. Please." Asper begged. "I will give you anything. Anything." Sisyphus raised an eyebrow. He stood and walked to his window, gesturing down at his magnificent city. "Look at it, Mr. Asper. A jewel of civilization. But it has one flaw. A fatal flaw. We have no reliable, permanent source of fresh water. My people rely on cisterns and wells that run dry. You control the water. Your river is full, while my city is thirsty." Mr. Asper understood immediately. "You want a spring." "I don't just want a spring," Sisyphus corrected him. "I want a permanent, gushing fountain, right here in the center of my citadel, one that will never, ever run dry. Give my city eternal water, and I will give you the name of your daughter's kidnapper." The bargain was struck. Mr. Asper, using his divine power, struck the rock of the Acrocorinth, and from it, a miraculous spring of pure, clean water burst forth. The people of Corinth cheered. Sisyphus had secured his city's future. He had proven, once again, that he was the master deal-maker. He leaned in close to the grieving father and whispered the name. It was Zeus. Sisyphus had fulfilled his end of the bargain. But in doing so, he had committed the ultimate sin. It wasn't just that he had ratted out the king of the gods. It was that he, a mere mortal, had dared to interfere. He had used divine secrets as a bargaining chip for mortal gain. He had traded the personal business of Olympus for plumbing. The fury of Zeus was absolute. This was not just an insult, it was a fundamental breach of the order of the universe. A mortal had used information against a god. Sisyphus, in his cleverness, had forgotten one crucial rule. When you play games with the gods, you don't just risk losing. You risk everything. High on Olympus, Zeus turned his burning gaze toward the city of Corinth. He wasn't just going to punish Sisyphus. He was going to make an example of him. He made a call to the darkest corner of the cosmos, to the one entity that Sisyphus could not bribe, trick, or negotiate with. He called for Thanatos. He called for death. The clever king's time was up. When Zeus, the chief executive of the cosmos, makes a call to death, the line doesn't ring. It just connects. Down in the gray, silent underworld, the entity known as Thanatos received his assignment. Sisyphus of Corinth. Collection. Immediate. Cause. Divine interference. Thanatos wasn't a monster. He wasn't a skeleton in a robe. He was an auditor. An adjuster. The silent partner in all existence. He was the force that balanced the books. He arrived in Corinth not with a crash of thunder, but like a shadow detaching itself from a wall. One moment, Sisyphus was alone in his high tower study, admiring his new freshwater spring. The next, a cold presence filled the room. Sisyphus didn't jump. He didn't plead, or bargain, or fall to his knees. He had been expecting this. He had been planning for it. He simply turned from his window, a polite, almost welcoming smile on his face. "Thanatos," he said, his voice calm. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You're looking a bit pale. Can I offer you a drink? You look like you've had a long eternity." Death was taken aback. This was not the usual protocol. The fear, the screaming, the begging, that was the protocol. This was hospitality. "I am not here to socialize, Sisyphus," Thanatos said. His voice wasn't a boom, it was a whisper that sounded like it was coming from inside your own head. "I am here to escort you. Your time has expired." Of course, Sisyphus said, waving a dismissive hand as he walked toward a heavy oak door. "Duty calls. I get it. I'm a busy man myself. But before we go, you simply must see this. It's a new invention. A little hobby of mine. As a man of, shall we say, permanent solutions, I think you'll appreciate the craftsmanship." Thanatos, bound by the ancient laws of hospitality, and perhaps a sliver of curiosity, followed. Sisyphus led him down a winding staircase into his cellar. But this wasn't a wine cellar. It was a vault. It was reinforced, soundproof, and in the very center, there was an object that looked like an elaborate, high-backed chair, forged from a dark, unfamiliar metal. "What is this?" Thanatos hissed, feeling the air grow unnaturally still. "It's a holding cell," Sisyphus announced, beaming like a proud inventor at a tech expo. "But I have a problem. I commissioned it to be the strongest thing ever built. Indestructible. Escape-proof. I told the blacksmiths, this needs to hold a god, if necessary. They laughed at me." Sisyphus ran a hand along the polished metal. "They said nothing can hold a divine being. That the very idea of containing a force of nature is absurd. And I think they might be right. It's probably a failure." He turned to Death, his expression one of profound disappointment. "Look at these chains," he said, picking up a heavy, intricate set of shackles connected to the chair. "They look strong, but what do you think? I bet even you, a force as absolute as death, could probably snap these with a flick of your wrist. They're just mortal toys, aren't they?" Thanatos looked at the contraption with pure contempt. The arrogance of this mortal was staggering. "You think this furniture could hold me?" No, probably not," Sisyphus said quickly. "But would you mind? Just for my own peace of mind. Just sit down, let me put them on. Just test them for me. When you inevitably break them in a second, at least I'll know the project was a failure. Please, indulge an old engineer." Thanatos scoffed. This would take but a moment. He sat in the chair, a grim monarch on a new throne. "Secure me, mortal, and let us be done with this farce." With surprising speed, Sisyphus began to lock the clasps. They were complex, puzzle-like mechanisms. Click, snap, whir. With each lock, a faint, magical sigil flared to life on the metal. When the final shackle clicked into place, Thanatos gave a casual pull, expecting the chains to shatter. They did not. He pulled harder. The metal didn't even groan. A flicker of surprise crossed his pale features. He tried to dematerialize, to become the shadow he was. He couldn't. He was bound. Solid. What is this?" Thanatos whispered, the first hint of panic in his eternal voice. Sisyphus stepped back, dusting his hands, the polite host disappearing, replaced by the cunning CEO who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. That, my friend, is a specially commissioned set of divine-grade, Hephaestus-designed shackles. Unbreakable, Sisyphus said, checking his fingernails. You're not going anywhere. Consider this an extended vacation. You've earned it. He turned and walked toward the stairs. Don't bother screaming, he called back. This room is, well, it's dead silent. And just like that, Sisyphus left death locked in his basement. The consequences were not immediate. But within a day, the world began to change. And it was not for the better. A soldier on a battlefield, pierced by a dozen arrows, collapsed, and then, groaning, he got back up. An old woman in Athens, breathing her last, pained breath, surrounded by her family, kept breathing. A man who fell from a rooftop in Thebes stood up, his bones shattered but his body unable to stop. The world had lost its off switch. The sick, the elderly, and the mortally wounded lingered in unending, inescapable agony. The cycle of life and death, the fundamental engine of the natural world, was broken. Predators caught prey, but could not kill it. Plagues ravaged cities, but offered no release. The world descended into a horrible, painful, overcrowded stasis. And the gods were furious. Down in the underworld, Hades, the god of the dead, was pacing his throne room. His spreadsheets were a mess. His intake was zero. The entire economy of his realm was grinding to a halt. But the most furious god of all was Ares, the god of war. War had suddenly become pointless. It was no longer a contest of mortals. It was a grotesque stalemate. Armies hacked at each other, but no one fell. The glory, the finality, the point of conflict was gone. War had lost its punctuation. It was just a meaningless, endless, agonizing sentence. Ares, covered in the blood that would not stop flowing, stormed into Zeus's throne room on Olympus. "This is a mockery," he roared. "Your pet mortal, Sisyphus, has broken my domain. He has captured your collector. Are you going to fix this, or shall I?" Zeus, his own authority already challenged by Sisyphus, rubbed his temples. The situation was out of control. "Fine," Zeus thundered. "Go. Go to Corinth. Find Thanatos. And if you have to tear that city down brick by brick to free him, do it." Ares grinned a terrible grin, hefting his blood-soaked spear. He stormed out of Olympus, his eyes set on one place, Sisyphus's wine cellar. The god of war was coming, and he was not going to be fooled by a clever chair. Ares did not knock. The god of war did not use a door. He arrived in Corinth like a meteor, landing in the central plaza and shattering the pristine pavement Sisyphus had just finished laying. The very air around him shimmered with heat and rage. The mortals of the death-proof city, who had grown careless, suddenly remembered what fear felt like. This was not a politician. This was a walking weapon of mass destruction. Sisyphus heard the crash from his tower. He knew instantly that the game had changed. His cleverness, his charm, his bribes, those were tools for dealing with thinkers. This was a hammer. He ran from the vault, sealing the door behind him, knowing it wouldn't hold for long. He found his wife, Meryl, who was clutching her heart, terrified by the tremor. "Meryl," Sisyphus said, his voice urgent, fast, but perfectly calm. He grabbed her by the shoulders. "Listen to me. This is the most important thing I will ever tell you. Do not question me. There is no time." "What is happening?" she cried. "Who is that?" "It's the cleanup crew," Sisyphus said. "They are here for me. And when they take me, when I die, you must do nothing." Meryl stared at him, confused. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean nothing," he insisted, his eyes boring into hers. "No funeral. No eulogy. Do not wash my body. Do not anoint it. Do not dress it in fine robes. And this is the most important part, Meryl. You must not place a coin in my mouth for the ferryman. Swear it to me. Swear that you will throw my body out into the city square like a common piece of trash." "Sisyphus." "No. I can't," she protested, horrified. "That is sacrilege. Your soul will wander forever. It's blasphemy." "It is my last and greatest plan," he hissed. "Do you trust me? Have I ever been wrong? Swear it." Just then, the palace doors exploded off their hinges. Meryl, weeping in terror and confusion, nodded. I swear." "Good," Sisyphus said. He straightened his robes, smoothed his hair, and walked calmly into the main hall to greet his guest. Ares was standing there, his spear dripping with everything. He was a being of pure, unadulterated rage. "Sisyphus," Ares roared. "Lord Ares, An unexpected pleasure, Sisyphus began, trying his old charm. If you've come about the war, I'd argue my new system is far more efficient. Think of the savings. No more replacing troops, no more. Sisyphus didn't get to finish. Ares backhanded him across the hall. The king, a mortal man, crashed into a marble column. Charm was useless here. Where is death? Ares bellowed. Sisyphus, coughing up blood, pointed a shaky finger toward the cellar. Downstairs. First door on the right. Ares didn't look for the handle. He tore the reinforced vault door from its frame as if it were paper. He stormed down the steps and found the scene. Thanatos, pale and weakened, but still divine, bound to the chair. With a single roar of pure rage, Ares shattered the Hephaestus-forged chains. Thanatos stood up slowly. He stretched his neck, his joints cracking. He was a being of absolute purpose. He looked at Ares, gave a brief, respectful nod, and then glided past him, up the stairs. Ares had done his job. But Thanatos, his work had just begun. And he had a serious backlog. Sisyphus, still slumped against the column, saw death approaching. The coldness returned to the room. So, Sisyphus managed, wiping his mouth. No hard feelings. It was just business. Thanatos didn't answer. He had been tricked, humiliated, and imprisoned by this mortal. His authority, the very concept of mortality, had been mocked. He placed one icy hand on Sisyphus's chest. There was no pain, no light, just a stop. Sisyphus, the clever king of Corinth, the founder, the CEO, the man who built an empire on information, collapsed to the floor, dead. His physical, mortal life was over. But Sisyphus wasn't gone. His soul, his essence, his consciousness, was pulled from his body. It felt like being vacuumed down a long, dark tube. The world of color and sound vanished, replaced by gray, mist, and the sound of lapping water. He found himself on a bleak, foggy shoreline. Before him was a vast, dark river, the river Styx. This was the checkpoint, the divide between the world of the living and the realm of Hades. A few other souls huddled nearby, weeping, confused. But Sisyphus was not confused. He was observing. He was calculating. A moment later, a flat-bottomed boat glided out of the mist, silent as the grave. At its stern stood the ancient, hooded figure of Charon, the ferryman. His job was simple: transport the paying customers. The boat nudged the shore. Charon held out one skeletal, gnarled hand. "Payment," he grumbled, his voice like gravel. The other souls, properly prepared by their grieving families, placed a single coin in his palm and were allowed to board. Then it was Sisyphus's turn. Charon held out his hand. Sisyphus, feigning confusion, patted his own ethereal pockets. He checked his mouth. His eyes went wide, and he put on the performance of his afterlife. "Payment," he gasped, his voice filled with shock and indignation. "Payment. Oh, this is terrible. This is an outrage." Charon's glowing eyes narrowed. "My wife," Sisyphus shouted, turning to the empty, misty bank. "My wretched wife, Meryl. She forgot. She forgot the coin. She hasn't paid my fare. Of all the disrespect. I am a king, and she has thrown me here with no way to cross. This is a disgrace to your entire operation, Charon." He started to make a scene, yelling at the other souls, demanding to see a manager. Charon blocked his path to the boat. "No coin," the ferryman grumbled. "No crossing." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Sisyphus demanded. "Not my problem," Charon said, and with a push of his long pole, the boat vanished back into the fog, leaving Sisyphus behind. Sisyphus stood alone on the shore. He was an anomaly, a soul that could not be processed. He was stuck, unburied, unpaid, and a major bureaucratic problem. And that, as Sisyphus knew, was a kind of problem the orderly, meticulous underworld could not stand for long. He just had to wait. For a place of eternal rest, the entrance to the underworld was surprisingly efficient. It was a system, built on rules, timelines, and one very simple transaction: payment for passage. Sisyphus, standing on the gray banks of the river Styx, was a wrench thrown into those gears. He was an unticketed passenger loitering at the main terminal. And he wasn't just waiting. He was complaining, loudly. "This is unacceptable service," he shouted to the empty mist. "I demand to speak to a supervisor. A king is left stranded because of domestic incompetence. What kind of operation is this?" He was a problem. Souls are meant to be processed. They arrive, they pay, they cross, they are judged, and they are filed. Sisyphus was an open case file, an anomaly, and he was cluttering up the reception area. Charon, the ancient ferryman, had seen millennia of souls. He had no patience for this. He couldn't take Sisyphus, but he couldn't leave him there. After several more boatloads came and went, with Sisyphus trying to stow away on each one, Charon finally had enough. He sent a message up the chain. "We have a codes at the docks. An unprocessed royal. Belligerent." The message, moving faster than any mortal signal, made its way through the vast, gray bureaucracy of the underworld. It passed the Furies, bypassed the judges, and landed directly on the desk of the CEO himself, Hades. Hades was not like his brother Zeus. Zeus was all flash, passion, and chaotic energy. Hades was an administrator. He was grim, orderly, and meticulous. He ran the largest, most efficient, and most permanent organization in existence. He valued order. He despised chaos. And he hated exceptions. "He's what?" Hades's voice, cold as a tomb, echoed in his black marble throne room. "A mortal is loitering at the Styx because his wife forgot the coin. Bring him to me now." But Sisyphus couldn't cross the river. So Hades made an exception, and it infuriated him. He dispatched 2 of his shadow guards, who dragged the soul of Sisyphus around the long way, through the service entrance, bypassing the standard protocols. Sisyphus was thrown onto the polished, black floor of the throne room. The air was cold and still. Before him sat Hades, a figure of immense, quiet power, his eyes holding the darkness of a dead star. Beside him sat his queen, Persephone. She looked bored, as she often did, but as she listened, a flicker of genuine intrigue crossed her face. "Explain yourself," Hades's voice boomed, not with a crackle of thunder, but with the finality of a closing vault. Sisyphus didn't stand. He scrambled to his knees and put his head in his hands, feigning the ultimate display of grief and despair. "O Lord Hades, master of this great domain, king of all that is final," Sisyphus cried, his voice breaking. "I am the most disgraced of all souls. I have been betrayed. I am the victim of the ultimate disrespect." Hades was unmoved. "You are the victim of a procedural error, mortal. Speak plainly." "My wife," Sisyphus choked out. "Meryl. She has defied the gods. She has defied the natural order. She has refused me the rights. As I lay dead in my own palace, she laughed. She mocked the laws of gods and men. She threw my body in the town square like a dog. She has kept the coin." He looked up, his eyes burning with a manufactured righteousness. "This isn't about me, Lord Hades," Sisyphus said, lowering his voice, making it conspiratorial, as if they were 2 executives discussing a serious corporate problem. "This is about you. It's about the law. It's about the entire system. If word gets out, if one person gets away with this, if a mortal learns that they can just skip the funeral rites, skip the payment to Charon, why would anyone ever do it again?" He leaned forward, sensing he had Hades's attention. "Think of the precedent. People will stop respecting the dead. They'll stop fearing the consequences. They will stop respecting you. Your entire economy, your processing, it will all collapse. It's a fundamental insult to your authority. She's making a mockery of your laws." Hades was silent. The logic was cold. It was sound. He looked at Persephone. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The mortal, for all his bluster, had a point. An unpaid fare was a threat to the entire system. "What do you propose?" Hades asked. "Let me go back," Sisyphus pleaded, tasting victory. "Just for 3 days. That's all I need. I am a ghost, a shade. Let me return as a warning. I will confront my wife. I will frighten her into obedience. I will show her the horror that awaits those who defy the gods of the underworld. I will make her give me a king's burial. I will ensure the coin is paid and that Charon gets his due." He bowed his head again. "I give you my sacred, unbreakable oath. I will return here, properly processed, and take my place among the dead. Please, Lord Hades, let me fix this. Let me defend your honor." Hades, the great administrator, weighed the options. On one hand, letting a soul return was unprecedented. On the other hand, Sisyphus was right. This was a loose end, a dangerous precedent. It was messy, and Hades hated mess. 3 days, Hades declared. You will teach your wife the meaning of respect. You will see to your own burial. And then, you will return. Thanatos himself will be dispatched to collect you, and he will not be fooled twice." "Thank you, my lord," Sisyphus cried. Hades waved his hand. The shadow guards seized Sisyphus. But instead of dragging him back to the river, they pulled him toward a different portal. Sisyphus felt a sudden, violent hook in his very essence, and he was pulled upwards, rocketing back through the darkness, back toward the light. He gasped. It was a gasp of real, cold, Corinthian air. His lungs burned. He was lying on a stone slab in the middle of the town square. He could feel the chill of the marble on his back. He could smell the olive oil from the market. A few commoners were shuffling past. One of them pointed. Is that? Sisyphus sat up. People screamed. They dropped their baskets. They ran. A man who was certifiably dead, a man whose body had been thrown out for the dogs, was sitting up and brushing dust off his robes. Across the square, from a high window in the palace, Sisyphus saw his wife, Meryl. She was watching, her face pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the windowsill. She looked terrified that her husband had risen from the dead. Sisyphus locked eyes with her. And then, he smiled. A slow, triumphant, devastatingly clever smile. She had kept her promise. And he had just become the first and only man to ever con his way out of hell. He had his 3 days. And he had no intention of ever going back. The silence in the Corinthian town square was absolute. It was broken only by the sound of a clay pot smashing as it fell from a woman's nerveless fingers. Sisyphus stood up. He stretched his neck, joints popping in a body that had been cold and still for the better part of a day. "Well," he announced to the terrified crowd, brushing dust from his fine robes. "That was an unpleasant nap." He walked, with all the purpose of a king, through his own city. The people didn't cheer, they didn't whisper. They parted before him like water, a silent, horrified wave. They were looking at a man who had been declared dead, a man whose body had been unceremoniously dumped in the plaza, now walking, breathing, and looking slightly annoyed. He walked into his palace. The guards, hardened veterans, dropped their spears and knelt, not in respect, but in raw, primal terror. This was a king who had defied the final law of nature. He found Meryl in her chambers, backed against a wall, her face as white as marble. You're a ghost," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Have you come to haunt me? I did what you said. I swore." Sisyphus laughed. It was a full, rich, living laugh. He crossed the room and pulled her into an embrace. "A ghost? My dear, I was," he said, "but I gave a very convincing performance. And you were the perfect co-conspirator. You gave me the foothold I needed. You were brilliant." He explained the entire con. The trip down. The scene he'd made for Sharon. The bureaucratic nightmare he'd created. The perfectly logical, businesslike proposal he'd made to Hades. Meryl was astonished. She had not been a party to his plan. She had been his most important, unwitting pawn. The first of the 3 days passed. Sisyphus did not, as promised, arrange a funeral. Instead, he held a feast. A welcome back gala. He paraded through his city, proving to everyone that he was not an apparition. He was flesh and blood. He was the man who had faced the void and conned it. The second day passed. He signed new trade agreements. He approved new building projects. It was business as usual. The third day arrived. This was the deadline. Hades was waiting. Thanatos was, presumably, sharpening his scythe. Sisyphus was in his study, drinking his finest wine. As midnight struck, the moment his parole officially expired, Sisyphus raised his glass to the empty shadows in the corner of the room. "To Lord Hades," he toasted, a smug grin on his face. "A fine administrator, but a poor judge of character. Better luck next time." Midnight passed. Nothing happened. No cold wind. No shadow at the door. No divine collector. Sisyphus waited a week, his nerves on a knife's edge, but his arrogance growing by the hour. Then a month. Then a year. Nothing. The gods, it seemed, were silent. Sisyphus had called their bluff, and they had not responded. He was a living paradox, a dead man walking, a soul who had broken his oath to the king of the underworld. His legend exploded. He wasn't just a clever king anymore. He was the Sisyphus, the man who cannot be kept dead. His hubris, already massive, inflated to divine proportions. He was, in his own mind, smarter than the gods. He had beaten the system. And so, Sisyphus lived. He lived, and he lived. He poured his manic, post-death energy into his city. Corinth became more powerful than ever, a testament to its immortal-seeming king. He made jokes at festivals. "I have a standing reservation in the underworld," he'd tell the crowds, "but I keep having to postpone. The service is just terrible." He lived so long that the incident with Thanatos, the escape from Hades, became a distant, proud memory. He grew old. His hair turned white, his back bent, but his eyes remained sharp, arrogant, and mocking. He watched his children grow up, and he watched their children grow up. He had lived a full life, twice. But in the cold, vast, efficient halls of the underworld, that file never closed. It sat on Hades's black obsidian desk for decades, a single, infuriating piece of unfinished business. Sisyphus, the one account that was still unbalanced. Hades was not a god of rage like his brother. He was a god of certainty. He was patient. The system always balances in the end. Finally, Sisyphus lay on his bed. He was 90 years old. He was, by any mortal standard, a success. He had won. He was dying, this time for real, of old age. He was ready, in his own way. He had beaten the gods and lived a second, full life. What more could a man do? He closed his eyes, expecting the final peaceful darkness he had cheated so long ago. A bright, energetic presence filled the room. It was not the cold shadow of Thanatos. This was different. "Sisyphus of Corinth," a new voice said. It was smooth, quick, and had a hint of sarcasm. "What a life. Or two. Seriously, very impressive. We've been following your career with great interest." Sisyphus opened his eyes. Standing at the foot of his bed was a young man, exuding an aura of impossible speed. He wore a traveler's cap and, most notably, sandals with small, feathered wings. It was Hermes, the divine messenger, the trickster god, the one who guided souls to the Styx. "Lord Hades sends his regards," Hermes said, checking a scroll. "He says your 3-day pass has, by his calculations, expired by 64 years, 7 months, and 5 days. He's displeased with the interest you've accrued. It's caused a bit of an auditing nightmare." I am dying of old age," Sisyphus rasped, feeling a new kind of fear. "I am ready. I will go." Hermes laughed. "Oh no. That's not how this works. You don't get to die a peaceful death. You're not a normal client. Thanatos is, well, he's been recused from your case. Apparently, you're a bit too slippery for him. And Hades can't trust you to come quietly. So, Zeus sent me." Hermes's smile vanished. "I'm the one who collects the special cases. The ones who run. The ones who hide. The ones who think they're smarter than the gods. And you, King Sisyphus, are the most special of all." Hermes grabbed the old man's soul, not with the cold touch of death, but with an unbreakable, divine grip. "Your file is long overdue," he said. "It's time to see the king." This time, there was no gentle tug. There was no dark tunnel. The grip of Hermes on Sisyphus's soul was not a suggestion, it was a divine clamp. "We're taking the express route," Hermes chirped, his voice bright and terrifying. "No lines, no waiting. It's one of the perks of being a VIP, a very infuriating prisoner." There was a sensation of impossible speed, a blurring of the boundaries between realms. They didn't descend, they simply arrived. They flew past the gray banks of the river Styx. Sisyphus saw the long, miserable queue of souls waiting for Charon, the same line he'd conned his way out of. The ancient ferryman looked up as they passed, his glowing eyes fixing on Sisyphus. He didn't speak, but simply dipped his head in a grim acknowledgement. The bill was finally being paid. "Processing," Hermes said, "is for mortals who didn't try to bankrupt the company. You're a special case. You're going straight to the boardroom." Sisyphus was flung through the great black doors and onto the cold marble floor. This was not the same throne room he had been in before. It was larger, darker, and more crowded. This was a full audit. Hades was on his throne, his face a mask of cold, satisfied order. Persephone was beside him, watching with keen, analytical interest. But they were not alone. In the corner, silent and observing, was Thanatos. His presence was a cold weight, the auditor whose jailing had started this whole mess. And on a second larger throne, crackling with atmospheric energy, sat Zeus himself. His face was dark, his beard bristled with static, and his eyes were the storm Sisyphus had been fleeing for decades. "Sisyphus of Corinth," Zeus's voice boomed, not a word, but the sound of a storm front arriving. "You have been a problem for a very long time." He leaned forward. "Let's review the file. You witnessed a private, divine matter. And you traded that information, my information, for a municipal water project. It was a breach of protocol. Sisyphus began, but he was cut off. Then, Hades spoke, his voice cutting through the thunder. You were collected, as was proper. You were brought here, to my realm, where you chained my chief collector, Thanatos. Thanatos's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. This, Hades continued, caused a system-wide failure. It caused chaos, suffering, and an imbalance in the natural order that took war to correct. And when you were finally brought down, killed, and delivered to my gates. Here, Hades stood up. You stood on this very floor. You gave me your sacred oath. You cried tears of manufactured grief. You used my own laws, my own love of order, against me. You turned my realm, my rules, into a game. A con. And then you skipped your parole. For 64 years. The silence in the room was absolute. Sisyphus, ever the salesman, even in the face of total ruin, tried one last time. He scrambled to his feet. Great gods! My lords! Wise Hades! Powerful Zeus! What I did! I am a builder, a creator. I made Corinth the jewel of the world. I did not mean to mock, I meant to achieve. Is achievement a crime? Is intelligence? Is it not the spark you yourselves gave to humanity? I was ambitious. Your ambition, Zeus thundered, is called hubris. You did not honor us. You mocked us. You saw us as competitors to be outsmarted. You stole from us, Sisyphus. You stole time. You stole a life you had not earned. You broke the fundamental contract between God and mortal. Your trial is over, Hades said, his voice flat. It was over 60 years ago when you broke your oath. We are here, Sisyphus, for sentencing. Sisyphus's blood ran cold. The question, Zeus mused, leaning back on his throne, is what to do with a man who thinks he can win any game. A man who thinks he can outsmart death. A man who believes any problem can be solved. He cannot be simply killed, Hades said, picking up the thought. He's already mastered that. Simple torture, like Tantalus or Ixion, is uncreative. He's a man of the mind. His punishment must be for the mind. He is a man of purpose, Zeus added. A project manager. His life was spent building, achieving, finishing the job. His greatest joy was in the completion. The successful deal. The finished wall. A terrible, divine understanding passed between the two brothers. Hades' cold, thin lips pulled back in what might have been the first smile he'd shown in a century. Yes, Hades whispered. We will not punish him with pain. We will punish him with futility. We will not punish him with despair. We will punish him with hope. Sisyphus looked back and forth between them, a new, terrible dread dawning. Sisyphus of Corinth, Hades declared, his voice now the voice of a judge passing an inescapable sentence. Your life's work was about meaningful ends. Your eternity will be about a meaningless task. You were a man of great projects. We have a new project for you. You will be taken to the deepest part of my realm, to the fields of Tartarus. A large boulder will be provided for you. Your task, Sisyphus, is simple. You must push this boulder to the top of a very steep hill. Sisyphus blinked. He processed the words. All this, for manual labor? He almost felt a flicker of relief. A boulder. A hill. It was labor, yes, but it was finite. It was a task. He was a master of logistics. A problem solver. He could do this. He could figure out the angles, the leverage. He could win. Just push it up the hill? Sisyphus clarified, his voice shaky. That's it. That's the punishment. That is the task, Hades confirmed, his dark eyes glittering. For eternity. Sisyphus nodded. He could do this. He could solve this puzzle. He could complete this task. What he did not yet understand, what the gods knew with a chilling, perfect certainty, was that his true punishment wasn't in the labor. It was in the almost. Hermes didn't drag Sisyphus to his punishment. He simply escorted him to the edge of the divine boardroom, and the floor fell away. Sisyphus tumbled, not into darkness, but into a gray, oppressive twilight. He landed, not with a crash, but with a soft thud, on gravel. Your new assignment is that way, Hermes' voice echoed from above, already distant. Good luck on your project, Sisyphus. I hear the deadlines are flexible. Sisyphus got to his feet. He was in Tartarus. But it was not a pit of fire and screaming demons. That was too chaotic. This was a place of divine, orderly, personal punishment. It was a vast, gray landscape, a cosmic factory floor of futility. In the near distance, he could see other figures. He saw a man, Tantalus, standing up to his chin in a clear lake, straining for a drink, only to have the water recede from his lips. Above him, a branch heavy with ripe fruit pulled away just as he reached for it. Sisyphus scoffed, even now. "A poor design," he muttered. "No wonder he's frustrated. At least I have a goal. A task." And then he saw it. His project. It was a hill. Not a mountain, but a hill, so steep it looked like a wall. The path up was not a path. It was a scar of loose shale, gravel, and slick, mossy rock. At its base sat the boulder. Sisyphus approached it, his project manager mind already at work. He was no longer a king, but he was still a problem solver. He walked around the rock. It was a perfect sphere of dark, heavy granite, the size of a carriage, impossibly heavy. He studied the hill. He looked for the angles, the path of least resistance. "This is a systems problem," he muttered to himself, spitting on his ethereal hands. "It's not about brute force. It's about leverage. It's about finding the groove, the one path that will hold the weight. There's a trick to it. They want me to fail, so they must have built in a solution, however small. I just have to find it." He set his shoulder against the cold stone. It didn't budge. He grunted. He, Sisyphus, the king, the CEO, had never really labored. He had paid others to labor. He had used his mind. But now, his mind was trapped in a body built for one purpose. He pushed again, this time with all the force of his immortal soul, all his rage, all his arrogance. Slowly, agonizingly, the boulder moved. It rolled 1 inch. A flicker of triumph. He had engaged the problem. He pushed. The rock grated against the gravel. He found a foothold. He pushed. He was Sisyphus. He finished things. He would finish this. Time lost all meaning. In this gray, sunless realm, there was no day or night. There was only the rock, the grit, and the slope. His mind, his sharp, clever, restless mind, was forced to focus on this one, singular, monotonous goal. He learned the boulder. He learned its weight, its balance. He learned the treacherous spots on the hill, the patches of slick moss, the beds of loose gravel. He would push for what felt like a day, gaining 10 feet, only to have a foothold slip and send him sliding back 5. But he was making progress. "This is the game," he panted, his essence sweating. "They want me to give up. They want me to despair. But I am smarter than this hill. I am smarter than this rock." He pushed. He strained. His muscles, his very soul, ached with a weariness he had never known in his 2 lives. But he kept going. He was 2/3 of the way up. He was a creature of pure, focused will. He would not be beaten. And then, he saw it. The crest. The summit. The flat plateau at the top of the hill. It was right there. Just 20 more feet. A new energy surged through him. Hope. A feeling so pure and powerful it almost made him weep. He was going to do it. He was going to win. He would push the boulder over the top, and what? Maybe they would let him go. Maybe they would give him a new task. It didn't matter. He would have completed the project. He would have proven to them, to Zeus, to Hades, that he was, even here, still Sisyphus. "I've done it!" he screamed into the gray void. "I've beaten you! I've won your stupid game!" He was 10 feet away. 5. He gathered all his strength, all his remaining will, for one final, glorious, triumphant heave. He planted his feet on a patch of what looked like solid rock, and he pushed. And right then, the rock betrayed him. It didn't just roll back. It leapt from his grasp, as if pushed by an invisible, divine hand. The surface of the boulder, which had been rough granite, suddenly felt like polished, oiled ice. The patch of solid rock under his feet dissolved into liquid mud. He grabbed for it, but his fingers, raw and bleeding, found no purchase. He watched, helpless, his mouth open in a silent scream. The boulder stopped. It hung in the air for one, heart-stopping, impossible second, just an inch from the crest. And then, it fell backward. It rolled. Slowly at first, then picking up terrible speed. It crashed against the rocks he had so painfully passed, gouging new scars in the path, echoing a terrible, rumbling, mocking laugh of stone against stone. It rolled all the way down, down, down. It landed with a soft, final thud. Sisyphus stood at the top. He was empty-handed. He had succeeded. He had reached the summit. But the work, the project, was not complete. He looked down the entire vast, impossible length of the hill. The boulder was waiting for him, in the exact, precise depression it had started in. It was a perfect reset. He had to go back down. He had to walk past all the ground he had gained. He had to fetch it. All that work, all that pain, all that glorious, burning hope. It was for nothing. He finally understood. This wasn't a punishment of labor. It was a punishment of progress. It wasn't about the pushing. It was about the almost. It was a rigged game, and the gods had just shown him the cheat. The hope he'd felt, that was the knife. And they had just twisted it. He sat, just for a moment, at the top of the hill, the only man to ever reach it. And he knew, with a dawning, icy, eternal terror, he had to do it again. The summit was silent. The air was dead. Sisyphus stood, his hands raw, his soul aching, his mind reeling. He had done it. He had reached the top. And it meant nothing. But the worst part, he realized, was not the failure. It was the view. He was looking down. The walk down the hill was the true beginning of the torture. The push, he now understood, was the easy part. The push was labor, it was focus, it was a challenge. It was work. The walk down was a confession of failure. Every step he took on the loose gravel was a step away from the goal. Every moment, he was walking toward his chains. The boulder sat at the bottom, waiting for him, a cold, round period at the end of a sentence that would be written again, and again, and again. He walked. The gray twilight of Tartarus seemed to mock him. A perfect reset, he muttered to himself, his conman's brain analyzing the system even in his despair. A code S, a Sisyphus code. They didn't just design a punishment, they designed a program. A loop. All that hope, that glorious, burning hope I felt. That's the venom. That's the part that really kills. The gods hadn't just given him a task. They had given him a script. An eternal, two-act play. Act 1, the hopeful struggle. Act 2, the crushing defeat. And they, in their cosmic boardroom, had a front-row seat. He finally reached the bottom. He stood before the rock. It was unmarked, perfect, cold, as if his sweat and blood and struggle had never even happened. He stood there for what might have been a day, or a year. Silence. And then he roared. It was not a word. It was a raw, furious, primal sound, ripped from his very essence. It was the sound of the ultimate executive realizing his shareholders were thieves. It was the sound of a genius realizing he had been played for a fool. "You want me to push?" he screamed at the gray sky. "I'll push. I'll push this rock so hard, I'll push it off the other side of your stupid mountain. I'll break your curse with pure, brute force." He slammed his shoulder into the boulder. This was his plan B. If logic failed, rage would have to do. This time, there was no finesse. There was no analysis of the path. He was a bull, a force of pure, mindless fury. He shoved the rock, cursing Zeus, cursing Hades, cursing Hermes. He didn't care about the gravel that tore at his feet. He didn't care about the pain. He powered through, fueled by adrenaline and spite. He was faster this time. The rage gave him a terrible, desperate strength. He stormed up the hill, his mind black with fury. He arrived at the top, his breath coming in ragged sobs. He was at the crest. "Now what?" he bellowed at the sky. "Now do your trick. I'm ready for it. I dare you." He remembered that slip, the feeling of ice. "I won't let it slip," he snarled. "I won't push it over. I'll brace it. I'll wedge it right here on the peak." He heaved the rock, not over the top, but onto the top. With a final, agonizing grunt, he got the center of gravity to rest precisely on the summit's edge. It teetered. It's staying, he whispered, his rage momentarily forgotten, replaced by a wild, disbelieving shock. "It's staying. I did it." And then, a whoosh. A sudden howling gust of wind, smelling of the grave and cold iron, slammed into the boulder from the top of the hill. It wasn't a natural wind. It was a divine slap. It was Hades, with a single contemptuous breath, saying, "No." The boulder was blasted from his hands, thrown backward with such force that Sisyphus himself was knocked to the ground. It tumbled, end over end, crashing back down the hill even more violently than the first time. It came to rest, once again, in its perfect, starting depression. Sisyphus lay on the ground, shaking. Not from exertion. From pure, impotent rage. He had failed again. He couldn't outthink the curse. He couldn't outmuscle it. This time, the walk down was different. The rage was gone, burned away. It was too exhausting to maintain. He was empty. This wasn't a physics problem. This wasn't a strength problem. This was a will problem. Theirs versus his. And their will was the operating system of this entire reality. He sat at the bottom of the hill, next to his boulder, for a long, long time. "Okay," he finally whispered to the rock. "So, I can't win with my mind. I can't win with my strength. How do I win?" And the old Sisyphus, the con man, the deal maker, stirred within him. What if the win is not trying to win? What if this is a test? A test of humility. He looked up, as if he could see the gods watching him. "Is that the key, Hades?" he whispered to the shadows. "You want me to accept this? You want me to repent? Fine, fine." He stood up. "I'll be the most humble prisoner you've ever seen. I'll just do the work. No tricks, no anger, no hope. I'll just be the man who pushes the rock. And maybe after a year, or a century, or a millennium, you'll get bored. You'll see I'm cured. You'll see I've learned my lesson. And you'll let me rest. You'll let me stop." He placed his hands on the boulder. He bowed his head as if in prayer. He was no longer the CEO. He was no longer the rebel. He was the actor. He was playing the part of the penitent. He began to push. A slow, steady, joyless rhythm. He was still Sisyphus. He was still trying to find the angle. He was still trying to con his way out. And the gods, they knew it. And so, the performance began. Plan C, Sisyphus, the actor, took the stage. He placed his hands upon the boulder, bowing his head in a perfect pantomime of repentance. He was no longer the arrogant CEO, no longer the raging rebel. He was the humble servant, the broken prisoner, the man who had finally learned his lesson. He was the picture of the penitent soul. "That's it," he coached himself as he began the slow, methodical push. "Don't look at the top. The top is hope. Hope is the trap. Just look at your feet. One step, then the next. Show them they've broken the wild stallion. Show them you are now just a dumb beast of burden. They'll see. They must see." He pushed. The journey up was slow, joyless, and impeccably performed. He did not curse. He did not strain with ambition. He just pushed. He reached the summit. He was at the crest, the place of his two previous dramatic failures. This time, he didn't brace the rock. He didn't rage at the sky. He simply stepped aside. He let go. The boulder hung for its one cruel second, and then it rolled. It crashed, as it always did, all the way back to the bottom. Sisyphus watched it go, his face a perfect mask of resignation. Yes, he thought, his mind still working, still scheming, underneath the performance. This is the way. I'm cooperating with the inevitable. I am accepting my fate. This is the con they cannot resist. The con of total surrender. He turned and began the long walk down, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He reached the bottom, paused for a respectful moment, and began again. And again. And again. He pushed. It rolled. He walked. The 100th push. The 1000th. His performance of humility was flawless. He became the perfect prisoner. The hill, which he once saw as a problem to be solved, then a wall to be assaulted, now was just the job. He was the model employee in this factory of futility. He was playing the long game. His con, he believed, would take an eon. But he was immortal. He had the time. But the gods are not mortal. They are not impatient. They do not get bored. They had designed this punishment with a chilling, perfect understanding of his mind. They knew he was an actor. They knew he was still trying to win. His performance of humility, his plan C, was, to them, just the third act of the play they had written. His brilliant, final con was playing to an empty theater. Or worse, to an audience that knew the script by heart and was simply watching him repeat his lines, over and in. He was on his, who knows which, walk down the hill. He had been performing humility for what felt like centuries. He had been so lost in the role of the broken prisoner that he had almost forgotten he was acting. And a thought, cold and sharp, cut through the performance. They don't care. They knew. They knew he was acting. And it didn't matter. He stopped, halfway down the slope. His con meant nothing to them. His cleverness was irrelevant. His rage was irrelevant. His performance was irrelevant. The realization hit him harder than the boulder ever could. There was no win. There was no out. There was no game to be gained. There was only the hill. There was only the rock. The actor's mask shattered. The self that was Sisyphus, the ego, the pride, the relentless, scheming mind, it just broke. All the plans, all the schemes, they were just noise. There was no plan D. Logic had failed. Rage had failed. Bargaining had failed. All the tools that had made him Sisyphus, the man who built Corinth, the man who conned Thanatos, the man who tricked Hades, they were all useless. They were toys in a box that had been locked and thrown away. He was nothing. He was no longer a king. He was no longer a conman. He was no longer even a prisoner. A prisoner, by definition, has a hope of escape, a memory of freedom. He was a function. He was the Sisyphus part in the Tartarus machine. The gods hadn't just jailed his body. They had finally, after all this time, broken his mind. They had made the universe's greatest project manager, the ultimate deal maker, empty. He continued his walk down the hill. The performance was over. There was only the reality. He reached the bottom. He stood before the boulder. His 10,000th time. His millionth. He didn't know. He didn't care. He placed his hands on the cold, familiar stone. He looked at his feet, and he pushed. But this time, it was different. There was no why. There was no plan C. There was no audience. There was no anger. There was no hope. There was no self. There was only the muscle, the rock, and the slope. And in that empty, mechanical, hopeless moment, Sisyphus, the king, the trickster, the legend, was truly and finally broken. The man who was Sisyphus was gone. The conman, the king, the father, the husband, the schemer, all of it was burned away by the acid of eons. There was only the Sisyphus machine. It was a perfect 6-step program for eternity. 1. Place hands on rock. 2. Push. 3. Reach crest. 4. Rock slips. 5. Rock rolls. 6. Walk down. Repeat. 1,000 years passed. 10,000. The gray twilight of Tartarus never changed. On the world above, his world, Corinth, his great city, the Wall Street of the ancient world, was a ruin. His children's children were dust. His name, once synonymous with cleverness and power, was now just a whisper, a footnote in a story told by old women. The gods had not just broken him, they had erased him. In the black halls of the underworld, Hades occasionally looked in on his most famous prisoner. He saw the mechanical, empty shell pushing the boulder. He is empty, the Lord of the Dead noted with satisfaction. The will is gone. The file is closed. The punishment was a total success. The great Sisyphus was just scenery. But on his 5 millionth, or perhaps 5 billionth, walk down the hill, something happened. Sisyphus was walking, his head down, his mind a gray, static fog. And then, a single tiny crystalline thought formed in the endless emptiness. It was not a plan. It was not a con. It was not a memory. It was just a thought. I am. The thought was so small, so quiet, it almost vanished. But it didn't. It was followed by another. I am walking. He reached the bottom of the hill. He stopped. For the first time in millennia, he stopped without it being part of the rhythm. He looked at the boulder. It was cold, silent, and waiting. This is my boulder. He looked at the hill. The long, treacherous slope. This is my hill. He looked at his own, raw, calloused hands. I am Sisyphus. His self, which had been shattered into a million pieces, did not reform as the old king. It began to reform as something new, something forged in the gray fire of futility. He saw the truth. The gods were right. His life was absurd. The task was futile. The game was rigged. He could not win. Every plan he had, logic, rage, bargaining, was doomed from the start. He stood there, a soul at the absolute bottom of existence, and he saw this terrible, crushing truth. And then, a new thought. The most dangerous, rebellious, and human thought possible. But, so what? So what if the game is rigged? So what if the task is meaningless? So what if the gods think they've won? Their entire punishment was based on one single assumption, that he would hate the task. That he would fight it. That he would suffer in his opposition to it. He had suffered. He had despaired. He was broken. But what if he stopped fighting? Not as a performance. Not as a con. What if he accepted it? What if he accepted the futility, the absurdity, the meaninglessness as the fundamental truth of his new existence? This was the final rebellion. The only one left. The last con. He could not win the game, but he could refuse to lose. He could not change his fate, but he could change his attitude toward it. The gods had sentenced him to push a rock in despair. He would choose to push it, and in doing so, he would rob them of their victory. He would scorn their punishment by owning it. He was no longer a slave, because a slave dreams of freedom. He was no longer a prisoner, because a prisoner dreams of escape. He was a master. The master of his own, hopeless fate. This hill was his. This rock was his. This moment, this eternal, repetitive, grinding moment, was his. In an entire universe of meaningless, God-controlled fate, this one, terrible, futile action was the one thing he possessed. It was his work. He placed his hands on the stone. He felt its familiar, cold texture. My rock, he thought. The gods, his jailers, they expected him to be a weeping, broken slave for all time. He would, instead, be a king. A king of one. The king of this hill. He set his shoulder to the rock. He began to push. He knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that it would roll back down. He knew with absolute, unshakable certainty that this moment of clarity would be followed by another moment of pain, another long walk down. But for now, he was the one in control. He was the one choosing to push. And in that choice, Sisyphus, the absurd hero, the king of the meaningless, smiled. The smile was small. It was barely a crack in his weathered, soul-etched features. But it was the most illegal, the most rebellious, the most dangerous thing in all of Tartarus. He pushed. The rock was still impossibly heavy. The hill was still impossibly steep. The gravel still slipped, and the moss was still slick. The physics of the punishment had not changed, but the why had. He was no longer pushing against his fate. He was pushing with it. His mind, once a desperate swarm of plans, rage, and schemes, was now quiet. He was no longer thinking about the past, his cons, or the future, his escape. He was, for the first time, focused entirely on the present. He felt the grain of the stone under his palms. It was rough, familiar, his. He noticed a new fissure in its side, a small crack that must have formed on his last, millionth descent. He felt the grit under his feet, the way his muscles had to compensate for a patch of loose shale. This was real. And in that profound, simple focus, his memories returned. But they were different. He saw Meryl, his wife, her face in the sun. He saw the high towers of Corinth, his monument to his own arrogance. He saw the dark, cold throne room of Hades. Before, these memories were torture. They were the ghosts of what he had lost. Now, they were just pictures. Pictures in a book he had already read. They were the prologue to his real story, which was this hill, this rock, this moment. He pushed. He labored. He sweated. But he was not a slave. He was an artisan. And this was his craft. He reached the crest. He was at the summit, the place of ultimate, repeated failure. He felt the familiar, divine nudge, preparing to cheat him. The air grew cold. The rock's surface became like ice. The old Sisyphus had braced. He had raged. He had despaired. The new Sisyphus did nothing. He held the boulder at the crest, looked his fate dead in the eye, and let it go. He stepped back and consciously, willfully, willed it to fall. He had taken agency over the failure. It was no longer something happening to him. It was part of the process he had chosen. He watched it fall. He watched the long, thunderous, destructive journey all the way back to the bottom. And then, he began his walk down. But this was not the walk of shame. This was not the walk of despair. This was his time. This was his break. This was the hour of consciousness. The push was the labor. The walk down was his. It was the moment without the burden. It was the moment his mind was truly free. He reflected. He observed. He was. This, he realized, was the other half of his eternity. And he would not waste it in misery. High above, in the divine boardroom, an alarm went off. Not a real alarm, but a flicker of concern. A report landed on Hades's desk. The Sisyphus file, which had been closed and marked punishment successful, was suddenly, flagrantly, open. Hades, the great administrator, focused his attention on his prisoner, and he saw it. "No," Hades whispered. "It's not possible." Zeus, hearing the distress, turned his gaze from Olympus. "What is it, brother? Has the mortal finally expired?" "Worse," Hades hissed, his voice full of a new, cold fury. "He is smiling." Zeus looked. He saw Sisyphus at the bottom of the hill, calmly stretching his shoulders, preparing for the next push. He looked contemplative. He looked content. "This is not punishment," Zeus roared, his voice cracking the clouds. "This is meditation. Make the rock hotter." "It doesn't matter," Hades replied, his voice grim. "We did that. He just learned to push a hot rock. We made it heavier. He just became stronger. We made the hill slicker. He just became more careful. But he was broken," Zeus insisted. "He was an empty shell. We won." "We won," Hades agreed, until he agreed with us. "He has done the one thing we never anticipated. He has not broken the chains. He has not outsmarted the guards. He has simply accepted his sentence. And in his total conscious acceptance, he has rendered the punishment, the suffering, null and void." Sisyphus had found the one thing in the universe the gods could not control, his own perspective. He had found the loophole in his eternal contract. The gods could command his body. They could command the rock. They could command the hill. But they could not command his mind. They had condemned him to a meaningless existence. And Sisyphus had looked at that meaninglessness, looked at them and said, "Yes, it is meaningless. And therefore, I am free to give it my own meaning." His meaning was defiance. His meaning was scorn. He had redefined winning. Winning was no longer getting the rock over the hill. Winning was getting to the bottom of the hill and choosing to push it again. He reached his boulder. He patted it like an old friend. He was not a broken man. He was an enlightened one. He was the master of the absurd. He was, in his own terrible, magnificent way, happy. He set his shoulder to the stone. He was ready, and the gods could do nothing but watch. He had won. That smile was a declaration of war. It was the sound of a prisoner picking the lock on his own mind. High on Olympus, in the divine boardroom, Zeus was pacing. The thunderclaps that echoed his steps rattled the heavens. "He smiles," Zeus roared, his voice shaking the cosmos. "At me." At his sentence. "He is a mortal, condemned. He is not allowed to be happy. This is unacceptable." Hades, back on his own throne, was tapping one long, cold finger on the arm of his chair. He was not explosive like his brother. He was calculating. The file was open. The account was unbalanced. "He has found a loophole, brother," Hades said, his voice a low hiss. "We cannot break his body. It is immortal. We cannot break his will to push. He has turned it into his strength. But we can break his peace." "How?" Zeus demanded. "He has accepted the task." "Precisament," Hades replied. "He has found sanctuary in the now. He has found a conscious moment of peace by focusing on the physical task, and in his hour of consciousness on the walk down, he has walled himself off. So, we will tear down the walls. We will poison the now with the then." The plan was simple. It was brilliant. It was divine. "He has scorned his punishment," Hades decreed. "So we will change the punishment. The rock and the hill will stay, but he will no longer be pushing a rock. He will be pushing his sins." Down in Tartarus, Sisyphus reached the bottom of his hill. He was in his new state of Zen, a master of his own fate. He had won. He turned, placed his hands on his rock, and began his conscious, willful push. "My rock," he thought, a flicker of that defiant smile on his lips. "My hill." He took 10 steps, and the gray mist around him thickened. Suddenly, he was not in Tartarus. He was in his cellar in Corinth. The air was cold, but it was the cold of his own vault. And the boulder changed. Its gray granite surface shifted, shimmered, and reformed. It was no longer a rock. It was the bound, chained, and humiliated body of Thanatos, Death himself. Sisyphus's hands were on the divine being he had trapped. "You broke the world," the illusion of Thanatos hissed, his voice cold. "Because of you, the old suffered. The sick found no release. You made a mockery of the natural order." Sisyphus faltered. His hands recoiled. He stumbled. His Zen shattered like glass. This was not just a rock. This was a reckoning. He was no longer an absurd hero. He was an auditor. He squeezed his eyes shut. It is a trick. It is just the rock. He pushed, and the illusion faded. The rock was a rock again, but that now was poisoned. The memory was no longer a picture in a book. It was hot. It was alive. He pushed on, his confidence shaken, his mind scrambling. He tried to find his center. Just the rock. Just the hill. He reached the halfway point. The shale under his feet felt soft. He looked down and almost screamed. He was not walking on gravel. He was pushing his boulder over the endless, pleading, grief-stricken face of Mr. Asper. "My daughter, Aegina, for a spring." The voice echoed from the very ground he walked on. "You traded her honor for water, Sisyphus. You sold her for plumbing." "No," Sisyphus cried. "It was a deal. It was a fair deal." But his heart pounded. This was not a punishment of futility. This was a punishment of guilt. This was a new kind of pain, a kind he had walled off for decades. He neared the summit. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from panic. He had to get this thing, to the top. He had to let it go. And then he heard a woman weeping. He looked at the boulder, and its surface shimmered like a mirage. It was Meryl, his wife. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a terror he had put there. "You conned me, Sisyphus," the illusion whispered. "I loved you. I trusted you. You made me an accomplice to a lie against the gods. You made me swear a false oath. You used my loyalty to save your own skin, and then you left me for 60 years to live with the fear that they would come for me." His hands were shaking. His mind was in chaos. He wasn't the master anymore. He was the perpetrator. He reached the crest, but his focus was gone. He was horrified. He was guilty. He fumbled. He tried to let the rock go, but his hands snagged. He wasn't in control. The boulder slipped from his trembling grasp, and as it rolled, it no longer sounded like a rumble. It sounded like an accusation. It sounded like Thanatos' hiss, Mr. Asper's groan, and Meryl's weeping, all in one terrible crashing chord. He stood at the top, his victory in ashes. And then, the walk down. His happy hour. His time. His sanctuary. It was gone. The gray mist was no longer empty. It was full of whispers. The shadows on the path were no longer just shadows. They were the faces of his victims. His real victims. The ones who had paid the price for his cleverness. He reached the bottom. The rock was just a rock again. The hill was just a hill. But the peace was gone. His mind, his final fortress, had been breached. The gods had found a new weapon. They couldn't break his will to push, so they had poisoned the reason. The smile was gone. The war for his soul had just begun again. The war was back on, but the battlefield had changed. The gods, in their infinite cruel wisdom, had found a new front. The hill was no longer a physical challenge. It was a courtroom. The boulder was no longer a tool of futility. It was a projector. And Sisyphus, every single day, was on trial. He stood at the bottom of the hill. The smile was gone. The absurd peace was gone. He was trembling. He had to push. The sentence was still the sentence. But now he was afraid. He was afraid to touch the rock. He was afraid of what it would show him. He set his hands to the cold, familiar stone. He pushed. Immediately, the rock shimmered. The vision of Meryl, his wife, appeared, her face etched with the terror he had caused. "You used my love, Sisyphus. You made me a liar." He flinched, his zen a distant memory. He squeezed his eyes shut. "It's not real. It's an illusion. It's their trick." But it felt real. The guilt was real. He pushed on, his mind a battlefield. And the gods escalated. They didn't just show him his greatest hits. They showed him the consequences he had never seen. The rock's surface swirled, and he was no longer in Tartarus. He was on a bloody battlefield in the world above. A young soldier, no older than his own son, was lying on the ground, riddled with arrows. But he wasn't dead. Because of Sisyphus's trick, Thanatos was chained. The soldier looked right at Sisyphus, his eyes wide with an agony that had no end. "Why?" the soldier gasped, tears of blood rolling down his face. I'm done. Why can't I die?" "It was me," Sisyphus whispered, his voice cracking. I did that. I didn't know. The boulder had not gained an ounce. But the weight was suddenly unbearable. He was no longer pushing stone. He was pushing the suffering of that young soldier. He pushed on. The vision faded, only to be replaced by another. An old woman in a sickbed in Athens, her body withered by disease, her breath a shallow, painful rattle. She was pleading, not for life, but for the release that Sisyphus had stolen from the world. He was pushing her pain. He was pushing the grief of Mr. Asper. He was pushing the ambition that had cost a girl her freedom. High above, Hades watched. And for the first time, his smile was not cold. It was satisfied. Yes, he whispered. Now he is punished. Let him feel the network of lives he tore apart with his cleverness. Let him understand consequence. His absurd victory was just another form of hubris. This is truth. The smile was gone. The absurd hero was dead. This was a hell far worse than the one of futility. The void of meaninglessness, from chapter 9, was a cold, empty piece. This was a hot, screaming hell of guilt. I deserve this, Sisyphus thought, and the thought broke him in a way the loop never could. I am not just a prisoner. I am a villain. I deserve this hill. I deserve this rock. He reached the top, a broken, weeping mess. He let the boulder go, and its crash was the sound of a closing gavel. Guilty. And then, the walk down. His hour of consciousness, his happy hour, was now the hour of judgment. The whispers were all around him. The faces of the soldier, the old woman, of Meryl, of Thanatos, they were the shadows. His mind was not his own. It was a prison cell, and the gods had just thrown all his victims in with him. He walked. He wept. This was the true breaking. Not of his will, but of his spirit. He reached the bottom. He sat, his head in his hands, for an aeon. He was destroyed. But he was still Sisyphus. He was a conman. He was a schemer. He was a strategist. His mind, though besieged and broken, was still working. It was looking for a new path. A new plan. Plan A, logic, failed. Plan B, rage, failed. Plan C, bargaining, failed. Plan D, scorn, failed. He looked at his hands, slick with his own, spectral tears. They want me to feel this guilt, he whispered. They are showing me my sins. Why? To torment me, yes. But what if it's more than that? And the new idea, Plan E, began to form. What if acceptance of the task wasn't enough? What if the real test is to accept the guilt? What if Plan D was just more hubris? More, I am the master? He stood up. He looked at the hill. Is this the final con, Hades? He whispered to the sky. You want me to repent? You want me to atone? Fine. I will. I am guilty. I am a monster. I did this. He was, once again, trying to find the exit. He was, once again, hoping. He reached for the boulder. The vision of Thanatos, chained, appeared. Instead of flinching, Sisyphus looked at it. His face was a mask of agony. I am sorry, he wept. He began to push. But he was no longer the absurd hero. He was the penitent sinner. He was not pushing with scorn. He was pushing with remorse. He was trying to purge his guilt through this labor. He would burn away his sins with this fire. He was still Sisyphus. He was just playing a new role. And he was hoping that this finally was the performance the gods were waiting for. And so, the penitent sinner began his labor. This was Plan E, atonement. But he was still Sisyphus. This was just another, more subtle form of bargaining. It was a transaction. He was no longer trying to steal his freedom. He was trying to buy it. And the coin, he now believed, was his own remorse. He set his shoulder to the rock, his body tensed for the inevitable visions. The boulder shimmered. It showed him the undying soldier on the battlefield. Forgive me, Sisyphus wept, and this time, the tears were part of his strategy. He was performing his guilt. I was arrogant. I was blind. I didn't see the cost. This is it, he thought, his mind racing, even as he cried. They don't want scorn. They want submission. They want me to break. I've broken. Now, the healing. Now, the absolution. I'll perform this. I'll mean it. I will be the best penitent sinner they have ever seen. He pushed on. The vision of the old woman in her sickbed appeared, pleading for release. "I am sorry," Sisyphus cried, "for the peace I stole from you." High above, in the divine command center, Hades watched. He felt the shift. He felt the hope. And he laughed. It was a cold, dry, terrible sound. He thinks this is church," Hades hissed to Zeus, who was watching with renewed interest. "He thinks he can confess his way out. He thinks remorse is a key." "He is hoping," Zeus said, his eyes glittering. "He is hoping for an end. He believes this, too, is a test." "It is," Hades replied, "and it is one we are happy to let him take." A cruel, divine idea formed. He wants absolution. He wants forgiveness. Let's give it to him. Down in the pit, Sisyphus was struggling under the weight of his guilt. He neared the summit. The final, most painful vision appeared. Meryl, his wife, her face stained with tears. "You used me. You conned me. You left me. I am so sorry, my love," Sisyphus choked out, his performance so total he was drowning in it. "More than all the others. I am sorry for what I did to you." And then, the illusion changed. Meryl's image stopped weeping. She looked at him, and the terror in her eyes faded. A soft, sad smile touched her lips. "I know my husband," the illusion whispered. "I forgive you." Sisyphus stopped. He physically stumbled. His heart leapt. A jolt of pure, unadulterated hope shot through him. It worked. "Meryl," he whispered. "I forgive you," she said again and faded. He was light. The weight of his guilt was lifting. He pushed the boulder the last few feet. The vision of Thanatos appeared, chained. "I'm sorry," Sisyphus said, his voice now strong. Thanatos just nodded. "The scales must be balanced," the illusion said, and vanished. He was being cleansed. He was being redeemed. This was it. This was the final key. The gods hadn't wanted logic, or rage, or scorn. They had wanted repentance. He reached the summit. He was crying, but with joy. The curse was broken. He was free. "I've done it," he shouted to the gray sky. "I understand. I'm done." He stood at the crest, his heart pounding, waiting for the trumpets of his release, for the hand of Hermes to pull him up to somewhere. Anywhere but here. He pushed the rock onto the crest. He let it go. He closed his eyes, ready for his reward. He waited. Nothing. He opened his eyes. The boulder was just sitting there, teetering. And then, with a sound that was no longer a rumble, or a scream, or an accusation, but a soft, divine, cosmic giggle, it slipped. It rolled. It crashed, tumbled, and bounced, all the way back down the hill. It landed, with a soft, final thud, in its perfect starting place. Sisyphus didn't move. He just stared. The forgiveness was a lie. The absolution was a lie. His hope, his beautiful, earned, agonizing hope, that was the real torture. They hadn't been punishing his guilt. They had been using it. They had played with his remorse. They had weaponized his atonement. They had built him a staircase of false hope, just to watch him fall from the top. This was the final, greatest con. And he had been the mark. He turned. He began the walk down. The walk was silent. The illusions were gone. The whispers were gone. The faces in the shadows were gone. The gods weren't tormenting him with guilt anymore. They didn't need to. They had just proven, in the cruelest way possible, that his guilt was as useless as his pride. His repentance was a joke. He reached the bottom of the hill. He looked at the rock. It was just a rock. He was empty. Not the Zen emptiness of the absurd hero. That was a full emptiness. A conscious choice. This was the emptiness of a man who has played every card and lost. He had no more plans. No more cons. No more hope. No more anger. No more scorn. No more remorse. He had tried every path. Logic. Rage. Bargaining. Scorn. Atonement. Every single one was a dead end, a trap, a trick. He had no more moves. He had no more self. He just was. And the rock was waiting. He stood at the bottom of the hill. The rock was waiting. His companion. His enemy. His self. He had no more plans. The conman was dead. His cons were useless. The king was dead. His authority was a joke. The rebel was dead. His rage was pointless. The penitent sinner was dead. His remorse was a trap. He had tried every key. Every lock was a fake. He set his shoulder to the stone and pushed. His mind was silent. It was not the Zen silence of the absurd hero, which was a conscious act of defiance. This was the silence of an empty room, a vacant lot, the silence of a machine that has been left running, its purpose long since forgotten. Push, step, grit, slope, crest, slip, roll, walk, repeat. And in this state, an eon passed, an age of the world. On the earth above, mountains rose and fell. Ice ages came and went. His city of Corinth was not just a ruin, it was a layer of dust under the ruins of other, later cities. His name was no longer a myth, it was a forgotten word from a dead language. Sisyphus just pushed. He was no longer a man. He was a feature of the landscape. He was a geological event. He was the Sisyphus formation, a constant, grinding, eternal process. He was no longer a noun. He was a verb. To Sisyphus, to labor endlessly, without purpose. The gods were bored. Hades, in his vast, efficient domain, had finally archived the Sisyphus file. He stamped it in black, final ink, punishment normalized. The prisoner was a success. He was broken, empty, and mechanical. The game was won. It was, frankly, finished. Zeus had not looked down into that gray corner of Tartarus in millennia, but on the 900 billionth, walked down the hill, in that perfect, empty, mechanical silence, a new thought arose. It was not, I am. It was not a plan. It was not a memory. It was, what was I? And in that moment of pure, neutral observation, Sisyphus saw his entire punishment, his real punishment, laid out before him. He saw Plan A, logic. A trap. He saw Plan B, rage. A trap. He saw Plan C, bargaining. A desperate, foolish trap. He saw Plan D, scorn. The absurd hero. The cleverest trap. The one that felt like victory, but was just another form of pride, another way for the gods to engage him. He saw Plan E, atonement. The cruelest trap. The one that weaponized his own heart against him. He saw them all, and he realized they were all hope. Every single strategy, every plan, every mental escape was based on the hope that he could change the outcome. The hope that he could win. The hope that there was an exit. And the gods, in their infinite cunning, had used that hope. They had tortured him with his own unkillable optimism. And in that moment, at the bottom of the hill, Sisyphus let go. He truly let go. He let go of hope. He let go of winning. He let go of atonement. He let go of scorn. He let go of the gods. You have no more power over me, he realized. The thought was calm. It was not defiant. It was a simple fact. Your futility, he thought. It only worked because I hoped to complete the task. But I no longer hope for that. Your guilt, he thought. It only worked because I hoped for absolution. I no longer hope for that either. You have no more moves left. You've used futility. You've used guilt. You've used my hope, my rage, and my remorse. And they all are just noise. He had finally, truly surrendered. And in that total, absolute, unconditional surrender, he found his victory. This was the final state. Not defiance. Not scorn. Just acceptance. True, total, and indifferent acceptance. He no longer cared if the gods were watching. He no longer cared if he was a hero or a sinner. He realized the gods were irrelevant. They were just the weather. They were a condition of his existence, like the gravel, or the slope, or the weight of the rock. And you do not con the weather. You do not defy the weather. You just endure it. He reached the summit. He watched the rock roll. Yes, that is what it does. He felt nothing. No sadness. No anger. No joy. No scorn. He felt peace. The true, unshakable peace of a man who has no hope left to lose. He turned and began his walk down. He was not a hero. He was not a villain. He was not a king, or a conman, or a penitent. He was just Sisyphus, a man, with a rock, and a hill. The war was over. He had not won. He had outlasted them. He had outlasted the very concept of torture, by outlasting the hope that made it possible. He was, for the first time, completely and totally free. The Sisyphus machine was perfect. It was a closed loop of labor and futility. Push, roll, walk, repeat. The gods had created the ultimate prison. And in that loop, after eons of struggle, Sisyphus had found peace. It was not joy. It was not defiance. It was not the proud, scornful smile of the absurd hero. It was a simple, profound, and unshakable end to the war. He had no more hope, and therefore, he had no more fear. He had, in his own quiet way, won. This new state, this indifference, caused a new kind of panic in the divine boardroom. Hades, the great administrator, had archived the Sisyphus file. It was closed. But now, it was glowing, blinking, demanding attention. He opened it. He looked. He's stable, Hades said, and the word terrified him. He is no longer responding to stimuli. He is not suffering. He is not angry. He is not anything. He is neutral. Zeus's thunderhead rumbled. Neutral? He is in Tartarus. He is supposed to be in agony. This is the final hubris. This is the ultimate insolence. He is ignoring us. He has made us irrelevant. What do we do? Zeus roared, and for the first time, Hades was silent. He had no more moves. The gods had run out of tortures. We have nothing left, Hades admitted, the words tasting like ash. We used futility, he accepted it. We used guilt, he processed it. We used false hope, he saw through it. We've exhausted the arsenal. He has outlasted us. The gods, the masters of the cosmos, were beaten by a mortal's refusal to play their game. It was then that Persephone, queen of the underworld, who had watched this all in silence, stood up. I will go, she said, her voice clear and cool. I will go and see this indifferent man, this king of the void, who has broken my husband's perfect system. Sisyphus was on his walk down, his hour of peace, his moment of true consciousness, and a figure appeared on the path. She was not a gray shade. She was not a screaming, guilty vision. She was life, a flower in the gray wasteland. Persephone, the goddess of spring, stood in the deepest pit of Tartarus, and the oppressive air itself seemed to part for her. Sisyphus stopped. He looked at her, and he just nodded. He acknowledged her, as he would acknowledge a new crack in the rock, a new piece of weather. She was the first to speak. You do not weep. Sisyphus, his voice raspy from eons of disuse, replied. There is nothing to weep for. You do not smile, she observed. You are not the absurd hero you once tried to be. That was just another mask, wasn't it? It was, Sisyphus said. There is nothing to smile about. It just is. Persephone took a step closer, her eyes searching his. You have beaten them. My husband, Zeus. They are enraged. They have no more weapons against you. You have won. There is no winning, Sisyphus replied, his voice flat. There is no losing. They are the weather. The weather is. Persephone was in awe. This was not a con. This was not a performance. This was truth. But she had to be sure. She had to give him the final test. This new peace you have, she said softly. It is just another state. It is cold. It is empty. What if I offered you a different one? What if I offered you rest? Sisyphus's gaze, which had been distant, snapped into focus. He looked at her. What if I, she continued, could get Hades to change the terms? A day off. A century off, in a quiet, peaceful field. No rock. No hill. Just rest. I can offer you hope. There it was. The final weapon. The original poison. The one that had worked, time and time again. Sisyphus was silent for a long moment. He looked at Persephone. He looked at the rock, waiting for him at the bottom of the hill. No, he said. Persephone's eyes widened. What? No, Sisyphus said again. That rest, that hope, that is the chain. In that quiet field, I would begin to fear the rock's return. I would hope for another day off. I would be your prisoner, your pet. I would be a slave to your mercy. He gestured to the rock. This is honest. This is truth. It does not lie. It does not bargain. It is. Your hope is a lie. He shook his head. I am done with gods, and deals, and hope. I have my rock. That is all. That is enough. He turned his back on her. He dismissed the queen of the underworld. Persephone was breathless. He had refused salvation. He had chosen the rock over a promise of peace. He had chosen his truth over their lie. She vanished. Sisyphus reached his boulder. He was at peace. He was free. He placed his hands on the familiar, cold stone. He began to push. But Persephone, she arrived back in Hades's throne room. Her mind was reeling. He is magnificent, she whispered. Hades, who had been watching, just grunted. He is a problem. No, Persephone said, a new, dangerous light in her eyes. He is right. He is the first truly free man in this entire cosmos. And he is right. Your system, this entire punishment, is flawed. Hades looked at his queen, a new dread dawning. The Sisyphus problem was about to get much, much bigger. The throne room of Hades was silent, heavy, and cold. Miles below, in the gray twilight, Sisyphus was pushing. Indifferent, peaceful, free. And Hades, Lord of the Dead, King of the Unchanging, was losing. Persephone stood before him, her presence a strange, bright flower in the gloom. He refused me, she said, her voice quiet, but it echoed in the vast hall. He chose the rock over my offer of rest. Hades's dark form seemed to clench. He what? He refused salvation? He is mad. He's broken. No, Persephone said, her voice firm. He is whole. He is the first truly whole soul I have ever met in your domain. And that, my husband, is why your system is a failure. Failure! Hades's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He is in my deepest pit. He is an example. He is an example, Persephone agreed, walking the polished black floor. He is an example of your failure. You tried to break one man with meaninglessness. But you are not a god of meaninglessness, my husband. You are a god of order. And Sisyphus has found his own order. She turned to face him. You tried to torture him, and instead, you taught him. You taught him that all of your threats, all of your power, all of your cons, are just weather. You taught him that the only meaning in the cosmos is the meaning a man chooses for himself. You didn't break him, Hades. You created him. He is guilty. Hades roared, standing from his throne. He must be punished. And his punishment is over, Persephone countered, unintimidated. The labor continues, but the suffering is finished. You have lost. Your greatest, most secure prisoner is the only free man in your entire domain. Hades was speechless, his rage battling his cold, orderly logic. Look at this place, Persephone said, gesturing, not just at the hall, but at all of Tartarus. Look at your system. A man pushing a rock that does nothing. A man, Tantalus, reaching for water he can't drink. 50 women, pouring water into a jar that will not fill. It's wasteful, Hades. It's bad management. It is justice. It is your hubris. Persephone's voice flashed, like spring sunlight. This isn't justice. This isn't order. This is hoarding. You are hoarding souls in pointless, inefficient loops. And Sisyphus just proved that the soul craves purpose. It craves work. It needs it. So badly that he chose his rock over salvation. What are you saying? Hades whispered, his authority crumbling. I am saying we change the system, Persephone declared. I am saying we reform Tartarus. Hades looked at her as if she were the mad one. Reform? Tartarus? This is blasphemy. You're talking about rewarding the sinners. You're talking about hope, the very lie he rejected. No, she argued. I'm talking about utility. He rejected your lies. He rejected false hope. But he chose work. He chose the process. He owns his job. Let's honor that. Let's use that. She leaned in, her eyes bright with a revolutionary idea. What if Tartarus wasn't just a pit? What if it was the engine? What if all this energy, all this labor, wasn't a punishment? What if it powered something? Hades was reeling. This was an audit of his entire eternal existence. And Sisyphus, he finally managed. What of him? He, Persephone said, is the prophet of this new way. He is the first. He has earned his rock. So, let him keep it. But, let his work matter. Matter? How? Hades grumbled. It is a rock. It is a hill. It is the definition of meaninglessness. Persephone smiled. Is it? She asked. He is constant. He is eternal. He is rhythm. His push is the one unchanging, unstoppable fact in this entire realm. You are the god of the below, my husband. Your realm is dark. I am the goddess of the above. My world needs the sun. Hades' dark eyes widened as he understood. What if his eternal, unending, unstoppable push was the engine? Persephone whispered. What if, all this time, he wasn't just being punished with the push? What if he is the push? What if every time he pushes that rock up that hill, he is pushing the dawn? Pushing the dawn? Hades' voice was a low growl, echoing in the silent throne room. You want to turn the greatest conman, the most arrogant sinner, into the world's alarm clock? It's undignified. Is it? Persephone countered, her voice smooth and reasonable. Or is it the ultimate joke? The final con. Our con against him. Hades was listening. Think my husband, she said, pacing. His entire freedom, his peace, his indifference, it's all built on one foundation, the belief that his work is meaningless. He thinks he's free because he thinks his work is pointless. But we will know that his indifferent push, his act of scorn, is the most important job in the entire cosmos. She stopped and looked at him. He will serve the divine order he tried to defy, without his consent. He will think he is free, while being the most useful, most essential servant in our entire system. He is no longer a prisoner. He is a gear. His freedom becomes the illusion. His defiance becomes his function. It is poetic. It is your final, silent victory. Hades was quiet for a long, long time. He considered this. It was perfect. It reframed everything. It turned Sisyphus's victory into an unwitting servitude. It made his indifference a lie. He was more a slave than ever before, because he was a useful one. Do it, Hades declared. Let it be done. Link the machine to the world. Let his push be the engine. And let him never know what he truly does. Let him push in his arrogant peace, thinking he's free. And so, the code of reality was rewritten. The divine administrators changed the system. The Sisyphus task was no longer a punishment loop. It was an engine loop. It was connected. Down in Tartarus, Sisyphus, knowing nothing of this cosmic re-engineering, stood before his rock. He was at peace. He was in his state of true, indifferent freedom. He had outlasted them. He placed his hands on the familiar stone and began to push. And something was different. The rock, it didn't feel heavier. It felt connected. It felt purposeful, as if he wasn't just pushing it up the hill, but pushing it against a great, unseen weight. And then, he noticed the light. The eternal, unchanging, oppressive, gray twilight of Tartarus receded. As he pushed up, the deep gloom lifted. It became brighter. It wasn't sunlight, but he could see. He could see the grain of the rock in perfect detail. He could see the path, every pebble, every crack. The world, his prison, was illuminated by his own labor. Sisyphus, the indifferent man, observed this. He did not hope. He did not smile. He processed the data. The light is changing. He kept pushing. The higher he climbed, the brighter his world became. It was as if he, himself, was a torch, pushing back the shadows of the pit. He reached the summit. He was at the crest. He did as he always did. He let the rock go. And as the boulder crashed, and rumbled, and rolled down, the light drained from the world. The brightness fled. The darkness fell with the rock. By the time the boulder settled at the bottom, the deep, oppressive, cold darkness had returned. Sisyphus stood at the top. He saw it. He began his walk down, but his mind, his peaceful, silent, indifferent mind, was no longer silent. It was whirring. The push brought the light. The fall brought the dark. Push, light. Fall, dark. Push, day. Fall, night. His indifferent mind processed the data. He reached the bottom of the hill. He stood in the cold darkness, staring at the rock. My push does something. This was a new piece of information, a system-breaking piece of information. His entire philosophy of freedom, his peace, his victory, was built on the absolute, unshakable fact of futility. It was built on meaninglessness. But if it's not meaningless, if his push creates light, if his failure creates dark, then what is it? He was no longer indifferent. He was curious. And curiosity, he knew, is just another, more dangerous form of hope. His peace was shattered. His peace was shattered. But it was not replaced by despair. It was replaced by a humming, electric, dangerous curiosity. He stood at the bottom of the hill in the cold, oppressive dark. His indifferent philosophy, the one he had spent eons building, was in ruins. It was built on one simple lie, that his work was meaningless. It was not. He had to know. He had to test it. He placed his hands on the rock. He began to push. And as he pushed, he watched. The gloom receded. The darkness retreated from his effort. The world around him brightened. He pushed faster. He scrambled, his feet finding purchase, fueled by a new, manic energy. The light flared, matching his pace. It grew bright, and brighter still. And then, he stopped. Halfway up the hill, he dug in his heels. He held the rock. He strained, his muscles burning. He held it. And the light held. He was in control. Oh, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Oh my. The gods, in their ultimate final con, had made a mistake. They hadn't just made him a gear in the machine. They had given him the throttle. They had given him a button to push. High on Olympus, the sun itself seemed to stutter. What is he doing? Zeus roared. Why is the dawn stalling? Hades and Persephone were watching, in shared, horrified fascination. He knows, Persephone whispered. Not what he's doing. Not that he's pushing the dawn for the world above. But he knows he's doing something. He feels the connection. We failed. We've made it worse. Worse. For Sisyphus, it was glorious. A joy he hadn't felt since Corinth, since he laid the final stone on his great wall, surged through him. He wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't a conman. He wasn't a sinner. He was a builder again. He was building the day. He didn't know about the world of men. He didn't care about it. He was bringing light to his world, to Tartarus. In the new bright day he had created by holding the rock still, he looked around. And for the first time, he saw them. The other prisoners. He saw Tantalus, standing in his pool, and in the bright, clear light. Tantalus saw him. The man in the lake looked at Sisyphus on the hill, and he nodded. A small, grateful acknowledgement. Sisyphus was seen. He wasn't just a failure. He wasn't just a ghost. He was important. He was the man who brought the light. This wasn't a curse. This was a job. This was the most important job in the underworld. A new strength filled him. He was no longer indifferent. He was vital. He pushed the rock again, this time with a purpose. He pushed it all the way to the top. And he held it there. He strained, his entire being focused, not to win, but to prolong the day. To keep the light for his fellow prisoners. On Olympus, the gods were in a full-blown panic. He's ruining the schedule. Zeus bellowed. It's noon, and it stays noon. He's holding the sun. But the curse was still the curse. The physics of the punishment were still in place. He could hold it, but not forever. The divine, magical slip was not tied to his will. It was tied to the location. As he strained to hold the day in place, the rock, as it always did, betrayed him. It leapt from his grasp. The darkness crashed back. The light fled. The rock rumbled all the way to the bottom. Sisyphus stood at the top, in the returning gloom, catching his breath. He began his walk down. But the walk was different. It was no longer the peaceful walk of the indifferent man. It was no longer the guilty walk of the penitent sinner. It was urgent. He had a responsibility. The light was gone. His day was over. The darkness was his fault. The light was his job to restore. He wasn't a prisoner walking back to his cell. He was a worker, clocking in for his next shift. He reached the bottom. He stood in the cold dark. He was energized. He was Sisyphus, the light bringer. He had a title. He had a purpose. He grabbed the rock. He set his shoulder, and he smiled. A real, true, joyful smile. The smile of a man with a purpose. The smile of a man who loves his work. The gods had lost. They had lost completely and totally and finally. They had tried to break him with futility. He'd found defiance. They'd tried to break him with guilt. He'd found atonement. They'd tried to break him with despair. He'd found indifference. And finally, in their last desperate attempt to con him, they had accidentally given him meaning. And a meaningful punishment is no punishment at all. The gods were silent. They had played their final, most clever card. And they had lost. In the divine boardroom, the game was over. Hades, the Lord of the Dead, the great and terrible administrator, was mortified. His perfect, inescapable punishment was now a reward. Zeus, king of the gods, his face a storm cloud of pure, impotent rage, just left. He stood up, knocking over his throne, and vanished in a crash of thunder. He had rage quit the game. He had lost to a mortal. There was nothing more to be said. That left Hades and Persephone. He enjoys it, Hades whispered, his voice full of disbelief. He whistles. He loves his job. He's happy. Yes, Persephone said, her voice bright. He is. He has meaning. And that, my husband, was the answer all along. Not my meaning. Not your meaning. His meaning. He is reformed? Hades asked, the word tasting like poison. In a way, Persephone said. He is productive. He is stable. The Sisyphus model works. He is the most arrogant he's ever been. Hades countered. He thinks he's the light bringer. And is he not? Persephone replied, a small smile playing on her lips. It's working, Hades. The cosmic engine is running. The dawn is rising. Now, let's fix the rest of them. Hades looked at her, confused. The rest? This place, she said, gesturing to all of Tartarus. Your system of eternal, static punishment. It's inefficient. It's pointless. Sisyphus proved that the soul hates meaninglessness. It craves purpose. So, let's give it to them. Let's reform the pit. And Tantalus? Hades asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What job do you have for him? He's thirsty. He's hungry, Persephone said, her mind working fast, like a true reformer. That is his nature. So, let's use it. Let's move his tree. Let's lower his water. Let him drink. Let him eat. That's mercy. Hades roared. It's utility, she shot back. Let him drink, but let the water he bends to flow into the fields of asphodel. Let his punishment be irrigation. Let his eternal hunger and thirst feed the dead. Hades was silent. He was an administrator. He looked at his unproductive spreadsheets, and he loathed Sisyphus, but he admired the efficiency of the new model. And the Danaides, he grumbled. The 50 women pouring water into the leaky jar? Let their leaky jar be the filter, Persephone said, her ideas flowing. Let their futility become purity. Let their eternal pointless labor purify the waters of the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, so that the souls who drink from it are truly cleansed. Let their curse become their calling. Hade sat down. He was beaten, but he was also intrigued. This worked. This was order. This was efficient. It turned chaos into industry. Implement it, he finally grumbled. Implement the Sisyphus reforms. And so, the sound of Tartarus changed. The sound of weeping, of despair, was slowly replaced by the sound of work. The sound of purpose. The sound of groaning, yes, but the groaning of effort, not of agony. Sisyphus, the light-bringer, knew none of this. He didn't know he had sparked a revolution. He was working. He was joyful. His new, eternal routine began. He stood at the bottom. He set his shoulder to the stone. He pushed. And the light came up. The day began. And he heard others. He heard. Tantalus let out a great groan, not of despair, but of effort as he bent to his new job. Sisyphus pushed to the top. He held the light, giving his fellow workers daylight to labor by. Then the curse, the physics, kicked in. The rock slipped. The whistle blew. The boulder fell. The darkness returned. And as Sisyphus walked down on his break, he heard the rush of the Danaides' water, doing its new job in the dark. He was the clock. He was the rhythm. He was the pacemaker for the whole reformed pit. He was the foreman of Tartarus. He had won. But his win was not escape. It was not freedom in the way he had once understood it. It was work. It was purpose. It was meaning. He, Sisyphus, the ultimate conman, had conned the gods into giving him a job, a meaningful life. He reached the bottom. He stood in the dark. He took a deep, satisfied breath. He set his shoulder to the stone, a happy man. And for the first time in a billion years, he whistled as he worked. The new Tartarus was working. The sound of the pit was no longer the sound of weeping. It was the sound of effort. It was the sound of a vast, dark, public works project. Tantalus, the new head of irrigation, groaned as he bent to send water to the fields. The Danaides, the filtration crew, chanted as they poured. And Sisyphus was the foreman. He was the pacemaker. He was the light bringer. He loved his job. He would push, and the day would begin. He would hold the light at the top, straining, giving his fellow workers time. Then the rock would fall, the whistle would blow, and the night shift, the Danaides, would begin their work in the dark. He had meaning. He had purpose. He was happy. And on Olympus, Zeus watched. He watched the efficient, purposeful, productive pit. He saw the reforms. He saw Tantalus feeding the dead. He saw the Danaides purifying the water. And he saw Sisyphus whistling. The king of the gods, who had rage quit the game, returned. His rage was no longer hot. It was cold. He appeared in the throne room of Hades. Persephone and Hades were reviewing the numbers. The Sisyphus reforms were, surprisingly, efficient. This, Zeus's voice boomed, cutting through the administrative chatter. This ends now. Persephone stood. Brother, it is working. The cosmos is using their labor. It is order. It is justice. They are serving. I did not sentence him to utility. Zeus thundered, his voice shaking the underworld. I sentenced him to suffering. He is whistling. You have failed. You have both failed me. Hades, the administrator, tried to protest. But Lord Zeus, the system, it is stable. It is productive. I do not care. Zeus roared. This reform is over. This is not justice. This is employment. You will reset the system. All of it. Persephone was horrified. You can't. You would take away their purpose. I will, Zeus said, his eyes cold. Put the water back, out of Tantalus's reach. Unplug the leaky jar. Let it be futility or nothing. And disconnect his rock. Hades was an administrator, but he was not the CEO. He had his orders. He protested. It is inefficient to undo the. Do it, Zeus commanded. And Hades obeyed. The king of the underworld typed in the final, terrible command. The code was rewritten again. The Sisyphus reforms were deleted. The engine was disconnected. Down in the pit, Sisyphus was ready for his shift. He was whistling his low, tuneless song. He was ready to bring the day. He put his shoulder to the rock. It felt light. It felt hollow, disconnected, wrong. He pushed, and nothing happened. The light did not come. The oppressive, gray, empty darkness remained. He stopped. The light. He looked around. The day hadn't started. No, he whispered. He pushed again. Faster. He scrambled up the hill. Nothing. The darkness was absolute. "The light!" he screamed. "Where is the light?" Nothing. And then he heard a new sound, a familiar, old sound, the sound of weeping. It was Tantalus, a horrible, agonizing, despairing wail. "It's gone. The water, it's gone. The fruit, it's back. It's gone." He had lost his job. His purpose, his meaning, his title, his identity was stolen from him. By them. He just pushed. Mechanically. His joy, his life, was gone. He was just a ghost, pushing a rock in the dark. He reached the top. The rock rolled. It was pointless again. He walked down. In the dark. The foreman was gone. The lightbringer was dead. He was just a prisoner in the dark. This was the true hell. It was not futility. It was futility after purpose. It was not meaninglessness. It was having meaning and losing it. He sat at the bottom of the hill. He sat for an eon. He looked at his hands. He looked at the rock. And for the first time since his atonement, Sisyphus wept. Sisyphus sat at the bottom of the hill in the cold, permanent, oppressive dark. And he wept. He had been broken before. He had been broken by futility. He had been broken by guilt. He had been broken by false hope. But this was the true breaking. The gods, Zeus, had given him purpose. They had let him taste meaning. They had let him be the light bringer. They had let him feel joy. And then, in an act of pure, petty, divine tyranny, they had taken it away. This was not futility. This was loss. This was not meaninglessness. This was emptiness. He had lost everything. His joy, his job, his pride. It was all a lie. A tool. A weapon they had used to finally destroy him. On Olympus, Zeus smiled. "Now," the king of the gods said to his Persephone was furious. Her reform, her engine, her better system had been vetoed by a tyrant. "He is a tyrant," she whispered, her voice shaking with a cold new rage. "And I am a queen. I am the queen of this realm, not him." And while Zeus was away, while he was not looking, Persephone acted. She, the queen, went down to the engine room of her realm, and she reconnected Tantalus. She reconnected the Danaides. She restarted the reforms in secret. Sisyphus was on his millionth push in the dark. His soul was dead. He was just a weeping machine, and he heard it. The sound of Tantalus's wailing stopped. He heard a groan of effort. He heard the rush of water purposefully flowing. He stopped. He listened. It's back. He was still in the dark. His job, his light, was gone. Zeus had kept him disconnected, but theirs wasn't. He stood, his mind, which had been dead, exploding with a new, final realization. She did it. Persephone defied Zeus. The gods are not unified. This wasn't just his fight. He was the spark. He was the prophet. He had started a war, a cold war in the underworld. His push was not about light. His push was about resistance. If he stopped, if he gave in to his despair, Zeus won. But if he pushed, even in the dark, even with no job, even in his pointless loop, he was choosing Persephone's side. He was showing defiance. He was protesting. His labor was his protest. He was the symbol. He was the foreman, even in the dark. He was still the pacemaker. His push, even if it did nothing, was everything. He set his shoulder to the stone. In the dark, he pushed. Not for light. Not for hope. Not for atonement. Not for scorn. He pushed as an act of rebellion. He was Sisyphus, the rebel. He was Sisyphus, the symbol. He was Sisyphus, the first of the resistance. He knew he was not alone. He knew that he mattered. He reaches the top. The rock rolls. He walks down in the dark. But he smiles. It is not the smile of scorn. It is not the smile of joy. It is a knowing smile. A rebel's smile. He will endure. He will resist. And he will push forever. Because that is his victory.